Hey guys, tonight we're stepping back into the chaotic halls and glittering stages of medieval courts where jesters weren't merry anomalies but precarious performers forced to juggle power and peril. Forget the fanciful tales and painted masks you hear about in storybooks. The real life of a jester came with cracked bells, croaking tunes and biting satire, sharpened to anger kings rather than amuse them. So tonight we're asking why it sucked to be a medieval jester and more, where every joke could cost you your head, every tumble could break your bones, and every court was a gamble between laughter and blade. Every realm had its own rituals, so let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is where you are. It is always telling to see whose fief or duchy we peek into tonight. Now polish your cap and bells, lean in and let us unlock the secrets of motley and mockery together. You step into the great hall for the first time, your eyes adjusting to the torchlight that dances across high tapestries. You carry only a small sack of clothes and the hopes of a village that whispered tales of your quick tongue and nimble feet. As you enter, you feel the weight of every gaze turning toward you, each pair of eyes eager to see if you will amuse or disappoint. You have come at the invitation of the Lord's steward, whose brief note promised a chance to earn bread and lodging in exchange for your performance. You stand before a raised dais, where the Lord and his entourage sit upon carved benches. You know that success here means safety and status. Failure means silence, or worse. Your heart hammers in your chest, but you straighten your back and bow deep. You begin your trial performance with a simple greeting spoken in a clear voice. You draw your hands from beneath your cloak and reveal a set of wooden balls carved smooth by years of juggling. You catch the first ball with a confident snap. The glint of the torch on the wood reminds you of the stakes. You toss and catch, shifting your weight to keep the rhythm going. Few courtiers clap lightly, but most wait to see what you do next. When the last ball settles in your palm, you draw a deep breath. You step forward and launch into a tale of absurd, courtly custom. You compare the stiff gowns of the ladies to gilded cages, and the heavy codpieces of the noblemen to a pair of rusty forelocks. A murmur ripples through the audience. You speed up the story and add a twist that pokes at the Lord's fondness for impractical fashions. He smiles and presses his lips together, as though tasting that first moment of amusement. You bow again and await judgment. The steward stands and offers a nod. You accept it as the highest compliment. He gestures to a scribe who steps forward and scratches your name into a leather register. With that single motion, you cross the threshold from outsider to jester in training. You lift your gaze to meet the Lord's eyes. He inclines his head slightly, as though warning you that this is only the beginning. You do not join the household as a free agent. You are bound by an oath sworn before the steward and the assembled courtiers. You place your hand upon a leather-bound copy of the court statutes. You vow never to reveal secrets you learn here. You promise to keep your wit sharp, yet never so sharp it cuts the life from the house. You swear to entertain the Lord and his guests, and to bear the brunt of jokes meant to diffuse anger. In return, you receive the fool's badge of office and a meager pension. You learn that the pension amounts to a loaf of bread each day and a flagon of weak ale at night. You receive lodging in a small loft above the great hall, where you can hear the scuffle of servants and the laughter of banquet guests. You know that these comforts could vanish with a single misstep. If your humor offends the wrong ear, or your loyalty falters, the Lord may strip you of your badge, replace you with another, or banish you from the court. You spend your first days observing your predecessor at work. He wears a motley jacket stitched in bright patches. A cap with 2 lopsided bells jingles at each turn of his head. His face is painted white with red circles on the cheeks. You study every motion he makes. You note how he greets each nobleman with a verse that flatters his vanity, and how he weaves modest jibe into harmless banter. You learn the places where his jokes land softly, and the names that must never be mocked. You train in secret by day in a courtyard behind the kitchens. You practice balancing on a wooden beam until your feet feel numb. You rehearse new rhymes until your tongue stings from the effort. At night, you sneak into the loft and review the register where your name stands alone as the new fool. You touch the leather binding and remind yourself of the promise you made. You repeat the oath to yourself as a chant against fear. You discover that not every jester begins in joke and jingle. Some enter by inheritance. A father who served one lord for decades passes the badge to his son. You meet such a jester in the hall as he pours wine for a visiting envoy. He offers you a rueful smile and shows you scars beneath his cap, where a previous master struck him for a poorly judged jibe. He presses a goblet into your hand and murmurs a warning. Learn to laugh at yourself first, or the court will do it for you. You also find that some lords prefer to recruit a local artisan with a talent for satire. They invite a quick-witted tailor or a tinkering carpenter to perform at a feast. If the performance pleases, they reward him with courtesy and a place at table. You watch how they move from stranger to court jester in a single evening, their pockets lined with coins and their eyes bright with the promise of new days ahead. Yet those recruits remain outsiders, guests of the moment rather than fixtures of the court. You hear of jesters who arrived under darker circumstances. A young nobleman exiled for scandal finds refuge under the motley as a fool. He trades noble birth for the license to jest. He speaks truth with impunity, mocking his former peers from the safety of his cap and bells. This jester wields his satire like a blade. His power stands on shifting ground, for any court that loses patience may recall the man behind the mask and punish him for offenses he once got away with. You learn that the bonds tying you to the household are precarious. You may enter and leave at the Lord's pleasure. Your oath binds you to serve, yet the Lord need not bind himself to pay you beyond the daily pension. You navigate this web of loyalty and obligation by keeping your humor sharp enough to please, but not so sharp as to harm. Each joke could win you favor or bring your end. You understand that to be the court jester means more than comic relief. You become a living instrument of power. You ease tension among nobles, and you test the limits of speech. You serve as confidant and fool in equal measure. You listen to conversation beneath the throne. You learn secrets others do not dare to share. In that position lies both privilege and peril. You reflect on the day you swore your oath and stepped into the motley. You recall the clamor of approval and the hush of doubt that followed. You know that the glittering stage of the great hall will soon feel like a cage. Your face will jingle with every step and your words will carry double meaning. You will laugh with the mighty and at the mighty. You will shoulder the risk of speaking truth to power with nothing but a jester's cap to protect you. Tonight, you sit in the loft and tuck your motley into a trunk. You polish the bells until they ring clear. You pray that tomorrow your performance will draw laughter rather than scorn. You vow to remember the oath you swore and the precarious bond that ties you to noble power. You know that your fate rests on a fragile balance between humor and hazard, and that the path of the medieval jester is one of constant trial and no small danger. You cross the threshold of the castle courtyard at first light, toes curled against the cold flagstone. This day marks the beginning of your apprenticeship under the master jester, a man whose laughter echoes in every corridor and whose tricks once charmed even the sternest of lords. You bow low before him, cape of plain wool draped awkwardly across your shoulders. He nods once and motions you forward. Your first lesson is in acrobatics. You stand before a sturdy beam raised only a foot from the ground, but already your heart pounds in your throat as you consider walking its narrow width. The master jester demonstrates with effortless grace. He steps from end to end without falter, bells at his cap tinkling in time with each footfall. You follow in his shadow, toes gripping the wood. On your first attempt, you wobble so badly you nearly fall into the dirt. The master claps once and says, chuckling, that balance is born of practice and of faith in the next step. Day after day you return to the beam and to a set of wooden blocks assembled as a makeshift ladder. You learn to climb upside down and to drop into a forward roll. Each bruise on your hip reminds you of the fall that nearly broke an elbow. With each session you grow steadier. By the end of the week you vault onto the beam with the confidence of a dancer. The master jester smiles and places a bell at your toes as a sign of progress. Music becomes your next challenge. You visit the castle's music room where lutes and tambourines hang on the walls. The minstrel kindly offers you a small drum. You rap the leather against your thigh and tap out a simple beat. Your fingers are clumsy at first, the rhythm stuttering until your mind catches up to your hands. The minstrel guides you through a melody, tapping his foot beneath the table. You strive to match his pace until the sound fills the room. He nods and says that with music, you can shape the mood of a feast or of a tournament crowd. You feel the weight of that promise as the drum echoes in your chest. Satire proves the sharpest skill you must master. In a small study behind the great hall, you recite verses that poke gentle fun at the steward's expensive shoes or at the cook's preference for salt over spice. The master jester listens from a corner, arms folded, eyes narrowed. You tumble over words that sound clever in your head but fall flat on the page. He corrects your rhyme and your meter, urging you to choose your targets wisely. A wrong jibe at the Lord's falcon could cost you your place. Each line you refine feels like walking a tightrope of wit. By midday, you step before an audience of guards and servants drawn by the master's summoning. You perform a short skit, juggling 3 small sacks filled with dried beans and weaving in a verse about the lazy porter. The guards exchange amused glances, but the master frowns. He tells you that humor must sting only slightly before it heals. Your joke lands too, harshly, and the porter bows his head in shame. You bow as well, apologizing. The master jester reminds you that a true fool holds a mirror to folly without shattering the heart of the audience. You train in swordplay as well, though without blade. A wooden sword becomes your companion. Each thrust and parry must look real enough to thrill a crowd. You learn to feint and to flip the sword over your arm and to catch it by the hilt. The master jester instructs you to add a comedic twist mid-duel, a pratfall or a flourish that draws laughter as well as applause. You wobble through each move until your arm aches and your chest heaves with effort. Yet, as you practice, you feel the spark of performance igniting in your blood. As the sun sinks, you gather with fellow jesters in the courtyard. They share tales of mishaps at distant courts and of earned favorites among fickle kings. You listen as an older jester tells of a performance before the queen that nearly ended in tears rather than in giggles. He learned to read her mood by the flicker of her earrings beneath the torchlight. You file that lesson away in your mind, along with every bruise and misstep of your day. Night brings one final test. In the loft above the hall, you stand before the iron-barred window and recite a short rhyme to yourself. You try to summon a sense of rhythm and of mischief. You remember the master's warning that your voice must carry, even through the roar of clinking goblets and raised voices. You imagine the faces below, flushed with wine, waiting for your next jibe. You whisper your lines until they become smooth and rolling on your tongue. Then you close your eyes and let sleep claim you. Each dawn you awaken stiff from the training. Your hips, your shoulders, your wrists all remind you of the effort you must pour into this craft. Each day you tee up to master a new skill while guarding against the ruin of a single failed act. Yet with each session the beam beneath your feet grows narrower and the smiles of your audience grow wider. You sense that this life will Demand every shred of courage and of cunning you can muster. By the end of your first fortnight, you stand before the master jester and receive a small badge of motley, a patchwork square you sew onto your cloak. It marks your passage from hopeful outsider to apprentice of the court. You feel its weight against your chest as both promise and burden. The master says that the real test lies not in training, but in performance before the Lord. Tomorrow, you step into the ring of light at the center of the hall, and your mettle will be measured in laughter rather than in sweat alone. Tonight you dream of juggling knives and of singing lines that send the crowd into raucous laughter. You wake with a start and touch the badge at your breast. You know that training will never end. Acrobatics and music and satire will call for new skill as each court brings fresh folly to expose. You close your eyes and vow that every lesson you learn, every bruise you bear, will prepare you for the day you stand at the center of the stage and know that you have earned your place in motley. You arrive in the castle courtyard as the first light of morning brushes the stone walls. Your heart thumps in your chest as you face the master jester for the first time. He stands before you in motley of bright patches, bells tinkling at every movement. You know that today will test every ounce of courage and skill you possess. There is no room for half measures. From this moment on, your life will revolve around a brutal regimen of acrobatics, music, and cutting wit. Your first lesson is in balance and in grace under pressure. You mount a narrow wooden beam, set only a few inches above soft straw. The master jester demonstrates by walking its length. With eyes fixed on the distant archway, you step forward with trembling feet. Each shift of weight feels precarious. You stumble on the first step and nearly topple. The master jester cries out a warning, yet does not move to steady you. You catch your balance and press on until you reach the end. You learn that in court every misstep risks public embarrassment or worse. Next comes tumbling and vaulting. You practice forward rolls and flips on a ring of mats while castle pages stand by to watch. You hurl yourself into the air and land on your back more often than on your feet. Pain blooms in your shoulders and your hips. The master jester corrects your posture with a curt word or a sharp glance. You learn that every motion must look effortless, even when your muscles burn and your skin bruises. The audience will not forgive a fool who cannot conceal the effort behind the trick. Music becomes a second language that you must speak fluently. In a small chamber, you sit at the feet of the court minstrel, who teaches you to play a simple tune on a small harp. Your fingers fumble at first, plucking strings out of tune. The minstrel nods and says that your performance must reach the king's ear like the soft song of spring. You practice hour after hour until the notes flow smoothly. Then you learn to accompany a ballad with a jig, so the court can clap its hands in time with your melody. You master the tune only to find that each new lord demands a fresh song. Satire forms the sharpest edge of your craft. You study the faces of courtiers as they pass through the great hall. You note the twitch of an eyebrow when the steward brags of his wealth. You memorize the manners of the chamberlain when he bows too deeply. You learn to weave those observations into clever jests that amuse without causing deadly offense. You write lines on scraps of parchment late into the night, testing each jest on a silent audience of straw and stone. You learn that humor must sit precisely on the fault line between truth and taboo. You are taught to speak truth only to power. In the hall, you step before the Lord and deliver a verse that mocks his stubborn pride in adding a new wing to the castle. The Lord's face reddens, but he laughs, for he knows that his folly spared no one else in the room. You bow and hear the sound of relief in every rustle of fabric. You discover that a well-placed jest can ease tension at the favelier phasings, council meetings, or challenge a dangerous advisor without blood being spilled. Yet you also learn that an ill-timed remark can lead to chains and to the dungeon. Physical endurance becomes essential. Each dawn you rise before the sun and practice your routines until sweat soaks your tunic. You learn to suppress pain when a muscle tears or when a joint twists. You apply herbal salve to bruises that blacken over days. You flinch at every creak of wood and every shout from the servants' quarters, fearing that another fall or another slip of the tongue will cost you your place. You train until your body becomes a tool of performance more than a source of comfort. Your public trials begin when the court holds a feast to welcome foreign envoys. The hall fills with candles and with the clink of silver goblets. You take your place under the gallery and signal the steward with a nod. He lifts a curt finger and a hush falls. You step into the light and play your harp while telling a rhyme that pokes fun at ambassadors who never learn the custom of the land. The gathered nobles laugh or frown in turn. You measure each reaction, ready to shift your tone if the mood darkens. After your opening tune, you move to tumbling feats across the long table, tossing a small wooden cup into the air and catching it without spill. The guests clap politely, though you know that only the king's glance can make or break you. At the final flip, you slip and knock the cup to the floor. Wine spills onto the linen, and the room falls silent. You bow deeply rather than flee. You scoop up the cup and offer it to the king with a flourish. He smiles at the gesture and raises his goblet in salute. You breathe again. In private, the master jester commends your quick thinking, yet warns you that you will need endless practice to recover from such stumbles. He reminds you that court life spares no one. You swallow your hurt and nod, for you know that the harsh lessons in this castle prepare you for the cruelest audience of all. Each night you retreat to the loft above the hall where the bells echo in your mind. You loosen your cap and press your forehead against the cool stone. You replay the day's routines in your head, noting each success and each slip. You vow to rise tomorrow with the same resolve and to carve your place in motley until you earn the right to ring those bells without fear. By the end of your first month, you feel both stronger and more fragile at once. Your body bears the marks of countless tumbles, and your mind lingers on each audience reaction. Yet you sense that you are becoming the kind of fool this court needs. You have mastered the quick step between comedy and caution. You have learned to let laughter hide your fear, and you have discovered that the greatest skill of all lies in standing proud under the gaze of a ruthless audience and in daring to perform despite the risk of ruin. You awake before dawn with the taste of nerves in your mouth. Today the master jester will teach you the art of thinking on your feet. He gathers you and 2 other apprentices in the chamber next to the great hall. A single beam of light slants through a high window onto a wooden floor, polished by generations of courtiers. You know that the skills you learn here will determine whether you become the household fool or fade into obscurity. Your first lesson is in improv. The master explains that no courtly performance ever follows a script. He throws a rolled piece of parchment onto the floor. You pick it up and find a single word, scribbled in faded ink: Falcon. At his nod, you have exactly 30 heartbeats to spin a tale that ends in laughter rather than in judgment. You pace a circle as your mind scrambles. You begin with the dignity of the bird, and then shift to a scene of a hunter whose cloak becomes tangled in the jesses. You pantomime the cloak whipping around his legs. The apprentices laugh, and the pantises. Master nods. You learn that wit must strike fast and land before the moment slips away. Next, you practice mimicry. The master jester calls forth the steward whose stoop and clipped accent you have observed for weeks. You step before him and begin to imitate the steward's measured cock of the head, and the way he fans a scrap of parchment. You exaggerate each motion until the steward slaps his thigh and laughs. You realize in that moment that heightening reality with just a touch of absurdity can transform a private quirk into public delight. A new exercise tests your timing. You stand with a small drum in hand while a page reads aloud. A proclamation from the Lord. The fool must interrupt at precisely the right moment with a honed comment. If you speak too soon, you steal thunder. If you speak too late, you bury the joke under the echo of bells. You count the syllables of the page's reading and practice a dozen lines until you find the perfect pause to drop in your correction. Each trial ends with the page resuming as though nothing happened, the audience gasping at your insertion of unexpected laughter. Music improvisation follows. You sit at a spinet with the minstrel and learn to adjust a tune to reflect the mood of a banquet. If the feast grows tense, you shift from a jaunty jig to a sorrowful lament. If the guests grow rowdy, you step up the tempo to coax them back into harmony. You learn that music holds power over emotion, and that a single wrong chord can sour the mood faster than spilled wine. You are then taught to wield satire like a blade. The master jester presents a poem riddled with praise for an envoy who seldom speaks. You are to rewrite it, so the envoy laughs at his own pompous style. You spend the better part of an hour carving verses that praise his silence above all other virtues. When you present the new poem, the envoy blushes and applauds himself. You learn that satire thrives on flattery wrapped in truth. Crowd work becomes your next challenge. The master herds you into the gallery while a small audience of guards, cooks, and stable boys gather below. You step to the railing and call out a greeting. They respond with jeers and a volley of small insults. You must answer, each with calm wit, or risk having a plate of porridge hurled at your head. You dodge a handful of stale bread and respond with a rhyme that turns the insult back on its speaker. The crowd erupts. You learn that a jester must read the mood and guide the crowd toward laughter rather than chaos. Another lesson tests flexibility. The master jester sets the table for a feast but changes the menu at the last moment. You prepared a routine built around roast swan and honeyed fruit. Now the table displays boiled turnips and brown bread. You step to the front and deliver lines about the virtues of humble fare. You pivot your act in real time, drawing laughs from the improvised shift. You realize that adapting on the fly separates a true jester from a mere entertainer. Physical comedy also earns its place. The master jester ties one of your hands behind your tawd back and instructs you to juggle 3 oranges. You lean into his challenge, tossing each fruit with precision that nearly betrays your handicap. You learn to tumble gracefully when you miss a catch. Every pratfall must look unplanned, yet timed to perfection. You discover that physical comedy demands courage as much as skill, for each stunt carries the risk of broken bone or humiliation. Language exercises push you to master multiple tongues. You recite a short verse in the local dialect of the court. Then you deliver it in Latin for the clergy and in a rough accent of merchants from the coast. You learn that courts host a mosaic of tongues and that jesters must bridge gaps. With humor everyone can share. Mispronouncing a word leads to puzzled stares. You repeat until every accent rings true. Finally, the master jester tests your memory. He reads a list of 10 names of courtiers and minor nobles. He then signals you to recite a poem that weaves them all into a tale about a hunt gone awry. You spin the names into characters. Lord Roderick as the strutting peacock, Lady Isabel as the timid hare. Each mention draws a knowing smile. You learn that knowing faces and names transforms jests into personal connections that cement your place in the court. By dusk you stand before the master jester and feel the ache in every muscle. You have learned to improvise in word and in deed. You have tested your skill with music and mimicry. You have faced the heat of crowd work and the strain of physical comedy. You understand that training never truly ends. Even after you master these drills, new courts will demand fresh skills. Tonight you return to your loft and hang your cap of bells on a peg. You cradle a drum and a small harp against your chest. You recall each stumble and each triumph from the day's training. You vow that tomorrow you will rise again at dawn and refine these skills until you can move like water and speak like lightning at the heart of power. You know now that to be a jester you must master more than a single talent. You must become the living embodiment of wit, courage, and grace under the ruthless gaze of every courtly eye. You push through the heavy oak doors of the wardrobe chamber and glimpse your new costume for the first time. A motley coat hangs on a peg, each patch a different color and texture. Rouge silk rubs against coarse wool. Bright green wool meets faded yellow linen. You slip it on and instantly feel the weight of every square of cloth. The patches tug at your shoulders and catch on each other as you move. You learn in that moment that motley is not merely a garment, but a mobile quilt that announces your presence in every room. You run your fingers along the seams where the patches meet. Some are stitched with sturdy thread that feels rough beneath your palm. Others hang loose, the fabric fraying like vines at the edge of a wall. A sudden breeze from the window stirs the edges of the coat, and you hear a faint rustle as if the cloth itself whispers your arrival. With each step, you feel the motley tug at your arms, reminding you that you wear the mark of fool as much as a badge of office. On your head, you place the jester's cap. It looks at first like a child's hat, soft and floppy. Then, you see the 3 points, each tipped with a tiny bell. You adjust the cap so that one point droops over your forehead, another flicks sideways, and the third stands upright. The bells catch the light and glint like metal freckles. You nod and the bells tinkle a curious chime. You realize that every move you make will summon that sound. It will herald your approach through silent corridors and shape every footstep into a performance. The bells hang heavy, each one weighing down its point of cloth. When you bow before the Lord, the bells crash together with a jingle so loud you startle your own ears. You flatten your shoulders against the weight and force yourself to stand erect. You learn that the cap with bells demands careful movement. A sudden turn of the head turns you into a one-man band, the bells drumming out your heartbeat for everyone to hear. Beneath the motley, you wear a tunic of bright red, its collar ruffled in a circle like sunlit waves. The sleeves balloon at the elbow, and then tighten at the wrist, where they meet leather gloves that you will soon stain with grease from turning lutes and drums. The tunic's skirt flares just enough to catch on your thighs when you bow or tumble. Each motion feels oddly stiff until you learn to coax the fabric to follow your body rather than stall it. In the mirror, you trace your painted face. A white base covers every inch from hairline to jaw. It feels cold and slick when you first spread it across your skin. You dab the white into each crease, around your eyes and over your lips. Then you press a circle of crimson on each cheek, 2 bright moons that glow beneath the torchlight. Your eyebrows become thin arcs painted in jet black. You flick them upward at each end, so your face appears frozen in surprise. You draw your lips into a wide smile with a pinch of red pigment. The paint pools at the corners of your mouth as though your grin might crack open. Every time you blink, you worry you will smudge the color beneath your lashes. You stand very still and let the paint dry. When you finally blink, your cheeks sting with dryness. You realize that each movement of your face now risks a smear of white creeping into your eyes or a smudge of red marking the edge of your beard. The paint brings stares from the servants who pass your window. They hesitate before they bow. A cook stops stirring the cauldron and leans his ear against the door to study your reflection. You swallow and feel the odd thrill of being both invisible and exposed. Your painted face becomes your mask and your mirror, warning you at once that you are no longer just yourself, but a performer who carries every eye in the room. You practice a grin before the glass. You let the corners of your mouth lift, though your cheeks feel tight. You test an eyebrow arch, and the bells on your cap tinkle in your still chamber. You allow yourself a small chuckle, though the noise sounds strange in your own ears. You stare until you become two versions of yourself, the man beneath the paint and the jester stepping into the great hall. You realize that one false smile might undo every patch of color and every stitch of the motley. You fasten a wide leather belt around your waist. The belt holds a pouch of tokens and a small wooden whistle. You learn to keep your tools close, for a dropped prop can ruin a routine at a single breath. The belt presses into your paint, and the motley's weight pulls at the fabric. You walk and bend to test the belt's grips. You practice drawing out the whistle and lifting it to your lips. Each small test hammers home the thought that your attire will shape every gesture and every sound. Before you leave the chamber, you tie a length of ribbon about your shoulders. The ribbon bears a tiny crest, the Lord's coat of arms woven in silk. You pin it above your heart with a silver, the brooch. You see the crest glint beneath the motley, a silent reminder that you belong first to the signed house and second to your own craft. You feel the weight of that loyalty rest on your chest like a second skin. You step into the corridor and feel the motley cling to each movement. The bells clang softly as you walk. You feel the paint crack at the corners of your eyes. You remember the stitches that might unravel if you tumble too far, or the paint that might drip if you sweat under the torchlight. You look down at the motley coat and realize that each patch stands for a lesson, learned or scar, earned. As you wait before the great hall, the guard nods and steps aside. You walk in, your cap, and bells announcing your presence. The courtiers glance your way. Some hide their smiles behind fans. Others stare unmoving, unsure whether to be amused or wary of the painted stranger who stands at the edge of the feast. You lift one foot in a jester's greeting and the bells ring clear. The hall falls into silence for a heartbeat, then laughter fills the air. You bow deeply, mindful of the motley catching on the dais. You let the bells tinkle as you swing your arms out in greeting. The paint crackles with each bow, but your smile stays firm. In that moment, you sense the power woven into your attire. The motley makes you both fool and oracle. The cap and bells give voice to your footsteps, and the painted face warns that no truth can hide behind everyday features. You stand amid the tiles of the hall and feel yourself become the living embodiment of mockery and marvel. Tonight you will perform beneath these eyes. You will let the motley coat swirl around your limbs, let the bells jingle in time with laughter. You will let the paint transform your face into a mask of wonder. You know that the jester's attire is not merely costume, but a language of cloth and sound and color. In that language, you speak to power and to folly alike. You step forward and let the motley announce your arrival. Your life as jester has truly begun. You step back from the mirror and survey the motley that clings to your skin. In the flickering torchlight, the patches of cloth form a patchwork of color and contradiction. You tug at the sleeve and feel the motley pull tight across your shoulder. The fabric whispers of every lesson you have learned and every fall you once survived. You realize that the costume is more than a garment. It is a living emblem of your role in the court, a reminder that the laughter you summon may turn to jeers if you stray from its narrow path. Your boots bear their own peculiar shape. They rise high above your ankles, curving at the toe into a long point that tosses the bells of the cap into a concordant jingle with each step. The leather around the calf creaks when you kneel to tie a bow. You found these boots in the castle cobbler's shop, purchased on credit and worn in until the seams softened. You know that tomorrow the bells will call out your approach before your voice reaches the hall. Every stir of the motley coat will create a chorus of metal that both charms and warns the assembled guests. Around your waist you wear a wide belt of dyed leather. From it hang props you will need. Tonight, a painted wooden rose for the lady of the court, and a carved wooden spoon for the steward who loves his broth. The spoon clatters softly against your thigh when you move. You tighten the belt until the motley coat bulges slightly above and below its seam. You must keep your tools close, for if you fumble a single prop, the court will remember the slip more vividly than the laughter you chased with your jibe. Your cap winks at you in the glass as you test its fit one last time. You lift each floppy point to check that the bells swing freely. You imagine the moment you step before the Lord, and how those bells will trill in the hush before your first line. You practice a small bow. The bells ring in your ears, and you see faces in the glass reflect delight and surprise. You know that the cap gives you license to speak boldly. Yet, license comes with cost. Each ring of the bell is an announcement that you stand within reach of power and that your words may test its limits. You draw your hands along the collar of the motley coat. The inside is lined with a coarse wool that scratches the back of your neck. You press your fingertips into the fabric until your knuckles whiten. You realize that behind every jest lies risk. The motley covers your skin but not your nerves. It cloaks you in color but not in courage. Each patch of cloth reminds you that you belong to a role that trades your comfort for the comfort of the court. You turn to the small mirror placed on a chest of drawers. The painted face peers back at you, pale as moonlight with crimson cheeks and ruby lips. You stretch your mouth into a grin and feel the paint crackle at the corners. You trace the arc of each eyebrow in ebony pigment. The face you create is both mask and statement. It proclaims that you speak in truth only under the guise of fool. You imagine the moment the curtain falls, and you remove the paint. The face beneath is still yours, still subject to every joke you deliver. In the corner rests the tiny scepter you wield when you perform. A carved wooden head sits at its tip, painted with a grin as wide as your own. You pick it up and twirl it in your hands. The head turns to catch the light and grin back at you. You shake your head and hear the paint flake from the cheeks onto your palm. The scepter is a companion in your performances, a symbol of power that is both borrowed and joked away. You learn to treat it with care, for if the head falls askew, the effect is more of horror than of humor. You slip on a thin leather glove and inspect the glove's fit. It extends halfway up your forearm, snug against the painted sleeve of your tunic. You tap the glove against the chest of drawers and hear a hollow rattle. You remove the glove and find a small bell sewn into its cuff. You realize that even your sleeves bear a sound meant to catch attention. Every inch of your costume carries a built-in drumbeat for your arrival. You practice clapping in gloves and listen to the muffled ring that emerges. The motley's design varies from court to court. In some halls, bright blue meets gold. In others, green and red dominate. Your motley is a mixture of both, chosen by the steward to set you apart. You wonder if the colors please your lord, or if they annoy him each time he sees them. You remember the day the advisor yelled that he could not take counsel with such gaudy cloth within his sight. The lord laughed and reminded the court that folly often speaks the bitterest truths. You vow to honor that balance in each stitch. You pick up a small mirror shard and stare into your painted eyes. In that fragment you see a flicker of doubt and a spark of resolve. The motley coat and the cap and the painted face have become the tools of your trade. They shape how others see you and how you see yourself. Under their weight, you carry the power to ease tension and the burden of potential scorn. You know that the world beyond these walls views your attire as a costume of laughter. You know that within these walls, your attire transforms you into living irony, a blend of humor and hazard. You take a last look at your reflection before the door opens. The master jester stands there, arms folded, bells of his own cap chiming softly. He nods and gestures to the great hall. You lift your chin, tighten the belt, adjust the cap, and step forward. The costume settles on your shoulders like a companion as you walk toward the torchlit corridor. The bells ring with each step. The motley flutters. Your painted face catches the glow. You feel both weight and pride. As you enter the hall, the lights seem to grow brighter. The guests pause in mid-laugh and mid-conversation. You stand in the center, where floors of polished stone reflect your motley in strange shadows. You lift your scepter in greeting and feel the silk ribbon press your chest. You bow low, letting the bells tingle in the hush. Then you lift your face to the crowd and draw a breath. In that moment, you become the fool whose attire draws, laughs, stares, and wary. Suspicion, all at once, and you know that each thread of cloth and every drop of paint carries the story of your craft and of the precarious place you hold in the court. You step into the great hall, with your motley and bells chiming in warning. The courtiers fall silent as you take your place before the dais. You feel every pair of eyes measuring your next move. Here humor is not idle pastime, but a weapon and a shield. One slip of your tongue can topple a favorite or expose a scandal. One clever turn of phrase can diffuse tension or rally hidden faction. You learn early that every joke carries a double edge. When you mock the steward's habit of checking ledgers 3 times before approving a purse for charity, you risk offending the man who holds the purse strings. Yet the assembled lords laugh because they know the steward's caution has cost them silver. Your jibe lands not as insult, but as shared truth. In that moment you become both fool and confidant, a messenger freed by humor to speak what others only whisper in shadows. Court intrigue swirls around you. You overhear the chamberlain plotting with foreign envoys. You catch the baroness, warning the captain of the guard about incriminating letters. You weave bits of gossip into your performance with care. You offer each lord an image of his own vanity so flattering that he cannot be angry. A quip about a nobleman's new hairstyle becomes a cautionary tale about pride. You cloak your insight in laughter and earn the trust of those who hear you. They speak more freely in your presence, believing that a jester speaks only for sport, yet humor can also betray. You once jested that the chancellor scribbles law books by candlelight until dawn, yet can't see his own errors in court. The chancellor roared with laughter. At first, but later confronted you in private. He warned that a joke at his expense might cost you your badge of office. You bowed and laughed again to spare your life. You learn that words, uttered in jest, can be invoked in earnest. You must choose your targets and your tone with surgical care. You find that patrons use you to press their agendas. A rival of the Queen's favourite begs you to include a sly reference to the favourite's proud walk. Another lord offers silver for a jingle that casts the favourite in a ridiculous light. You weigh each request against your own sense of loyalty. You know that your humour may shield you from complaint, yet also that every verse you speak is recorded by those who keep score. In that ledger of jests, your fate is written. Your sharp speech becomes a kind of counsel. When the king stands before his council and tensions run high, you step forward with a tale of a fox who lost his crown while chasing shadows. The lords chuckle at first, then they see the resemblance. The king smiles wryly, and nods toward the advisor whose counsel has led them astray. With a single story, you shift the balance of power without a drawn sword. You prove that jesters can guide the court as much as any minister. You also learn to lay traps for the unwary. You stage a mock duel with a wooden sword and invite the brash young knight to join you. You let him gain the upper hand before feigning collapse. When he gloats, you spring to your feet and brandish your sword at his throat. The hall gasps as you deliver a line about humility and honor. You bow deeply, and the knight joins in the laughter, humbled and grateful that you spared his life. In this dance of performance, you test the mettle of each man's pride. Yet the politics of humor can turn dark. You recall the jester who mocked the duke's sorrow for his lost child. He used words meant only to lighten the duke's grief. The duke did not laugh. He had the jester removed from court and never heard from him again. You see the empty alcove where the jester once served. You realize that humor trespasses on sacred ground, and that the jester's freedom vanishes where sorrow turns to rage. You vow never to touch upon grief too. Roar for laughter. You become adept at reading the mood of the court like weather. A sudden chill in the air signals an argument brewing. You step in with a rhyme about daylight dwindling and about shadows that chase every man. The lords soften, remembering the need to preserve unity. You find that humor can calm a storm if wielded at the right moment. But if you drag out a joke too long or jab at the wrong wound, you can summon the very horror you sought to dispel. Late one night, you discover a secret meeting among the chamberlain and two nobles. You slip a line into your next performance that details their plan to raise taxes on the poor. The hall erupts. In outrage, the king demands an explanation. The chamberlain and his allies cannot deny the king Bereshan. Truth laid bare in jest. You stand before the monarch and deliver a humble apology. The king laughs and declares you the truest jester in the realm. You watch as the chamberlain bows his head in defeat. You see how humor can level even the highest wall of deceit. Over time, you perfect the balance of risk and reward. You learn which names to invoke, which faults to expose, and which follies to leave untouched. You develop a shorthand of symbols and allegories that convey critique without direct insult. A painted harlequin on your scepter can stand for any traitor at court. A parade of wooden ducks in your next skit can represent each greedy lord that day. You mask your satire in art, and the court sees the reflection only after the show is done. You understand that your role extends beyond mere jest. You are a mirror held up to power, a living barometer of public opinion, a cautionary voice in a court where truth is costly. You use your sharp speech as a shield against threats and as a sword to cut through deception. Your laughter rings out in the hall as both a blessing and a warning. You navigate court intrigue with nerves of steel, a quick tongue, and a heart that knows the price of a single misstep. As evening falls, you gather your cap and bells once more and step into the great hall. You see faces lit by torchlight and by their own rivalries. You sense the currents swirling beneath polite conversation. You raise your scepter and begin your opening rhyme. The bells tinkle and the hall hushes. In that silence, you hold the power to heal or to harmonize or to expose. You smile and let the first words leave your lips. With that moment, you wield the politics of humor once more. You think you understand the weight of a single jest until you find yourself alone in a dimly lit corridor, replaying the words you spoke just moments ago. The laughter of the court still echoes in your ears, but beneath it you sense a tremor of unease. You realize that humor can shift alliances as surely as any proclamation from the throne. A passing comment about the 48 Chamberlain's new tax policy may seem harmless, yet by dawn, you learn that the Chamberlain's friends gather in secret behind closed doors, plotting to undermine you. You learn to listen as carefully as you speak. In the privacy of the steward's anteroom, you overhear a debate on land redistribution. You slip away and craft a jingle about a farmer who traded his plow for a featherbed. At dinner, you recite it with an innocent smile. The guests laugh politely, but the steward's face tightens. You know that you have drawn attention to a subject best left to whisper. You realize that your words can open doors to conversation or slam them shut. You cultivate friendships across the court to protect yourself. You share a laugh with the captain of the guard over his new helm. You praise the queen's taste in embroidery until she greets you warmly at the next feast. Each bond you form becomes a safe harbor when storms of gossip threaten to capsize you. Yet you are mindful that these alliances carry obligations. A jester who owes a favor may be called upon to throw shade at someone he would rather not offend. You maintain a ledger of rivalries and sympathies in your mind. You note that the Duchess of the West Wing has a soft spot for jests about starched collars. You remember that the Bishop of the North Wing shuns any mockery of the clergy. You tailor your performance to the guests you expect. You adapt each rhyme and each gesture to fit the balance of power at the table. You learn that a saved smile is more valuable than 1,000 forced laughs. You also master the art of deliberate silence. Sometimes the most potent jest is the one you never deliver. You feel the impulse to call out the knight who strutted in new armor, but you pause. You wait for a more appropriate moment when the entire court feels safe enough to laugh. Then you deliver your line and watch as the tension in every shoulder relaxes. You see a flicker of relief on the knight's face. You know that you have diffused a rivalry without blood spilled or scars earned. Yet silence can be mistaken for weakness. You once held your tongue when a heated argument erupted between two powerful lords. You feared pricking a sore too fresh. By the next day their dispute had escalated, and you were blamed for failing to lighten the mood. The next time you study the argument and slip in a jibe so perfectly timed that both lords laugh at themselves. You see the relief in their eyes and the grudging respect in their nods. You understand that humor can act as a balm when offered precisely. In the public eye, you wield your satire like a surgeon wields a scalpel. You remove only the worst tissue of pride or folly, careful not to sever a vital artery of loyalty. You learn that a joke about vanity can heal the wound of arrogance if it is small enough to feel like a tickle rather than a gouge. You weave your words so that the target remains in place, grateful that you cured his pride rather than cast him aside. You are always alert for unseen threats. A seemingly innocuous rhyme about the Lord's new falcon may provoke jealousy in the Hawk Master, who once served a rival house. You catch the Hawk Master's narrowed eyes and adjust your lines mid-recital. You add a verse praising the Hawk Master's skill in training. The Hawk Master's glare softens into a smile. You learn that savvier jesters anticipate the ripples their words create in the intricate web of court favor. You keep a small notebook hidden in your belt. You scribble tiny notes after each performance. Who laughed heartily, who frowned, who whispered in their neighbor's ear. At night, you review these clues like a general planning strategy. You see patterns emerge, tensions over land agreements, worries about heirs and succession, fear of rival courts forging alliances. You shape your next performance to address or to deflect these anxieties with humor. In that way, you guide the court's mood, as a captain guides a ship through stormy seas. You also face dangers beyond politics. A careless joke about the king's personal habits may earn laughter now, but cost you your head later. You recall the jester who compared the king's walks in the garden to a drunkard's stumble. The king laughed, but later banished the jester to a remote monastery. You learn that a fool's license has limits dictated by the temper of the ruler. You vow to know those boundaries better than any law book. Sometimes you use your humor to remind the great of their mortality. You cast a joke about a proud general who returns from victorious war only to find his lands plagued by rat infestations. You watch as the general's eyes grow distant. You see the moment he recalls that victory brings burden as well as glory. These gentle reminders serve the court by cooling hot tempers and refocusing attention on shared concerns. You become a mirror held up to folly in order to guide the wise back to prudence. Your survival depends on earning the trust of the Lord and of his closest advisors. You make frequent stops at the private garden, where the Lord often passes to contemplate the horizon. You bring a small poem about the sun rising over the fortress walls. You incline so the Lord perceives your respect. He smiles and unburdens a worry about foreign embassies. You guess at the solution and voice it in rhyme. The Lord laughs and walks away reassured. You learn that the jester's advice, delivered in humor, can slip past formal defenses and reach the heart of authority. Yet your words can carry unintended effects. You once praised a minister for balancing the kingdom's tax ledger. The minister beamed, but you saw how the chancellor seethed. The next day, the chancellor ordered your bells removed. You performed in silence until the Lord intervened. You bow before the chancellor with respect, accept back your bells, and vow to temper your praise. You understand that in the politics of humor, every compliment carries the risk of sparking envy. You hone your craft by observing human nature. You see that even the most powerful man craves a moment of humility wrapped in laughter. You note who laughs freely at self-mockery and who reacts with scorn. You record these details in your mind as precious intel for your next performance. You learn that the best jesters balance on the knife edge between head and heart, offering levity while preserving the dignity of those you entertain. By the end of the season, you become less a fool with bells and more a counselor in motley. You guide the court's conversation through laughter. You diffuse conflict with well-placed verse. You earn gratitude for your tongue, even as you risk your place with each daring line. You have mastered the subtle politics of humor, carrying your jests like letters bearing both risk and reward. You know that tomorrow you will step into the hall again with motley patched to your shoulders and bells calling out your intent. You will speak truth to power, with a wink and a rhyme, wielding humor as shield and sword in the ever-shifting dance of court intrigue. You wake before dawn to the rumble of pots and pans in the servants' hall. Your day begins with the clatter of a wooden bowl on a rough plank table and the swirl of thin porridge ladled from a great kettle. The porridge tastes of stale oats boiled in water that still carries a faint tang of last night's ale. You swallow it quickly, the cold oak beneath your elbows pressing into your ribs. This meager meal fuels your first acrobatics practice and the morning's quick verses for the breakfast crowd. After your performance, you slip away to the kitchens where the cook divides up the day's scraps. You push through a throng of scullery hands to claim a piece of coarse brown bread and a small hunk of cheese, riddled with spots of green mold. You nibble at the edge, tearing off any soft patch before swallowing the rest with a gulp of water drawn from the well. The water tastes faintly of iron and moss, but you dare not question it. Hunger trumps disgust in these quarters. You carry your bread and cheese back to your corner of the loft above the great hall. The loft is cramped with 4 narrow beds of straw mattresses laid head to foot. You share the space with the castle fool in waiting, a former minstrel whose joints creak from wear. There is barely room to stand between the beds. When you stretch your arms, the motley sleeves brush against your neighbor's head. You learn to move with care, lest you spill the porridge of sleep from your bowl, or jab the wooden post that anchors the low rafters. Privacy is a distant memory here. A single shuttered window admits a sliver of light, but no lock secures it from prying eyes. When you change into your motley coat, you do so in full view of the steward's clerk, who stands on the mast of hay that serves as his bed. He never turns away. You find yourself glancing at the door, longing for a canvas screen you cannot afford. You realize that your body belongs to the household as much as your voice and your songs. Midday brings a break in the training schedule. You hurry to the hall, just as the cook lifts the hood of the great oven. Today's offering is a thick stew of root vegetables boiled until they collapse into one another. A scant scrap of salted pork floats on the surface. You dip your bread into the broth and chase it down with a swallow of cool water. You marvel that this simple stew can sustain the guard captain and you both on the same ration. The difference lies only in the portion size. After the stew, you slip to a dark corner and rest your aching limbs. You lean your head against the rough stone wall and listen to the murmur of conversation above. The nobles dine on roasted fowl and spiced wine, but you hear only the drip of gravy from the stew pot. You know that if you had come at a different tide, you might carry a platter to the table instead of a bowl to the plank. Fate placed you here to earn applause rather than a seat of honor. When the afternoon training ends, you retreat to your loft with your fellow apprentices. By then, the walls of your chamber rattle from the laughter and music below. You stretch out on the straw, mattress, and prop your head on the edge of your sack. You close your eyes and imagine a soft bed with woolen blankets. Instead, you feel the coarse stalks digging into your back. You imagine falling through the cracks between the floorboards and into the cavern below. Evening arrives with a final meal in the kitchen. The cook offers a handful of cold porridge, or a slice of cheese if you are lucky. You ask for both and receive only the porridge. You eat it by the porridge, candlelight, as shrimping rats scurry across the stone floor. You watch their beady eyes and wonder who the real fools are in this castle. You swallow the last of the oats and feel the hunger return before sleep ever truly arrives. Night brings no stillness. The swinging lantern in the hall below casts a shadow through the single shutter. You hear the clank of pots as the cook snuffs the fires. The steward's clerk sighs on his haybed and mumbles a verse he learned long ago. You lie on your back and trace each rafter above you. You feel the motley coat draped across your chest, heavy with stitches and bells. You pull the coarse wool a bit closer to stave off the chill. Before dawn, your dreams drift to feasts and gilded banquets. You see platters piled high with roasted fowl and bowls of sweetmeat. You imagine yourself seated at the table with the nobility, singing a tune while they applaud your skill. Then a crack of the cooking pot below drags you back to the loft with a start. You wake to the memory of cold porridge and the weight of your costume. You rise and brace yourself for another day of meager meals, cramped quarters, and the loss of every ounce of privacy. You leave your loft before dawn, the same narrow beam creaking beneath your feet that you practiced on only days before. You descend into the stables area, where the ground is damp and straw is strewn in clumps. You must pass through here to reach the latrine. When night falls, the smell of horse and sweat lingers until morning. Your stomach clenches at the thought of another half-frozen porridge. The latrine stands at the far end of the courtyard, a crude wooden bench with several holes carved along its length. There are no partitions, only the faint hope that your comrades will grant you a moment's privacy by averting their eyes. You squat in silence, listening to the drip of water from a broken gutter above. The cold air stings your bare legs as you sit, and you pray that a sudden gust will not blow straw and dirt up around you. You carry a small vessel of sand to sprinkle over the waste, a token attempt at cleanliness. The next morning, you see that the sand has vanished into the cracks beneath the bench. The smell remains, a sour reminder of the hundreds who have sat before you. You learn that neglect here invites rats and insects. When you leave, You shake your cloak free of dust and scurry back to Rend. The kitchens. The scullery cooks prepare your midday meal beside a trough where water pools from a leaking pipe. You wash your fingers in that water before eating your coarse bread and cheese. The cook warns you that the water is only fit for boiling, but cannot spare you the time or the fuel for tea. You learn that survival depends on swallowing hardship in order to stand before the court. Back at the loft, you find your mattress riddled with fleas. You scratch at welts on your ankles as you unpack your motley coat. You remember that the last apprentice kept his boots hung on a hook to keep the pests at bay. You cannot spare a nail to hang your boots. You leave them on the floor and hope the fleas rise with the morning sun and not with your body heat. Your sleeping quarters have no shutters that lock and no curtains that close. You dress in full view of the steward's clerk, who grumbles the moment he sees your bright tunic. You hear him mutter that a fool wears his colours before he earns them. You finish fastening your belt and bow low to silence him. You learn that privacy is a currency more rare than even fine wine in this place. When the court gathers for an evening feast, you rest your feet on the cold stone steps. You listen as the guards and servants clamour about the tables, reeling barrels of ale and shifting boards of bread. You think of your loft where the ceiling beneath the eaves slopes low enough to bruise your head. You long for a moment of quiet, but find none in the bustle of preparation. After the feast, you return to your loft and find that someone has borrowed your coarse blanket. You search the bed beneath the straw mattress and find only the dust of a dozen sleepers. You layer the thin cloak you wore in performance across your shoulders and huddle in the lowest corner, shivering against the cold. The wind whistles through a gap in the roof, and you pull your bross hood tight. You lie there listening to the footfalls of night watchmen pacing below. They pass your window and shout to one another about some late returning drunk. You wonder if they ever pause to consider the jester who sleepwalks above them in motley coat. You feel the need to laugh at the absurdity of it all, but stifle the sound, lest the watchmen think you mad. Sometimes sick servants are carried into the loft to recover in solitude. You find them collapsed on the straw, covered in sweat, their breath rattling like dry leaves. You watch until a guard arrives to carry them back to the infirmary. You learn that disease stalks here as surely as laughter. No cure exists for more than a moment's distraction. Mornings you awaken with bruises on your knees from the coiled straw beneath you. You rub at the sores and curse your own folly for chasing applause above all else. You rise and greet the master jester, jingling your bells in exhausted salute. He nods a greeting, though his eyes never leave your face. You know he studies you for signs of weakness or of resolve. You learn that as jester, you are never alone, even when you wish for solitude. On rare occasions you find a charity of fresh water, carried in a cask and filtered through cloth. You fill your bowl and let the clear liquid run over your wrists, testing its warmth. You then use it to wash your face under the single open window. You feel the trickle of cool water over the white paint and watch the smudges gather at your hairline. You learn that small comforts can nourish the spirit when the body receives only gruel and mold. The master jester keeps a small chest of herbs and scented oils. He uses them only on feast days, anointing a bit of rosemary behind his ears. He offers you a sprig once and you place it in your codpiece pocket, hoping some of the scent will drift to your motley. The next day, the fragrant memory fills your nostrils, and you feel a moment of reprieve from the stench of stale bread and pressed bodies. You learn that fragrance can lift the heart, even if only for a beat. By the end of the week, you sense the squalor beneath your breath. You clench your teeth to keep the taste of last night's stew from rising. You wipe your sleeve across your mouth and feel the rough wool catch on your lip. You wonder if any of the perfumes in the castle could mask the scent of your own weariness. You learn that a jester's mask can hide his face but not his hunger or his fatigue. Tonight you return to your quarters and sit on the edge of the straw bed. The motley coat slips from your shoulders like a weight released. You lay it carefully over the trunk that holds your few belongings. You close your eyes and recall the dances of laughter that await you at dawn. You steel yourself for the cold floor and the lash of wind through the rafters. You vow that tomorrow, despite the meager meals and the lack of privacy, you will stand before the court and summon laughter once more. You know that the hardships of diet and quarters become part of your story as fool, and in that story you find a strange pride that no feast or fine bed can match. You stand beneath the flickering torchlight in the great hall, your bells silent for once. A hush falls over the assembled nobles. You know that tonight you walk a razor-thin line. One wrong word could turn laughter into rage. You clear your throat and force a smile as the chamberlain rises to address the court. Unbidden you quip about his fondness for long speeches that stretch like winter's night. The hall remains still for a heartbeat too long. You sense cold eyes turn toward you. You feel the weight of your motley coat as you bow and exit the stage. Behind you, the pestage. Chamberlain's lips tighten. In the days that follow, you discover that a joke at his expense cost you more than laughter. The next morning, you are summoned before the Lord's private chamber. Your heart hammers as you cross the cold flagstones. You enter and find the chamberlain flanked by 2 guards whose helmets glint in the torchlight. The chamberlain accuses you of insolence. He claims that your joke undermined his authority and embarrassed the court. The Lord sits silent on his carved bench, his face unreadable beneath the crown. You bow deeply and apologize, offering your bells as a token of repentance. The Lord nods curtly, but the chamberlain demands more. He insists you be confined to quarters until you learn modesty. You are marched away by the guards and locked in the dank space beneath the library steps. In that oubliette you hear rats scurrying and water dripping. You taste mold on the air. Your stomach twists at the memory of the porridge you ate hours ago. You realize how a single ill-timed jest can lead to immediate loss of freedom. You tremble at every distant footfall, fearing a knock on the door that will bring chains or worse. After 2 days, you are released, but your bells are removed and your cap replaced by a plain cloth hood. The court sees you in silence. No longer do your entrance bells jingle to herald your arrival. Instead, you enter unseen, stepping beneath murmured comments about a jester who overstepped his place. You learn that to survive, you must measure your jests as carefully as a knight measures his lance. On another occasion, you watch as a new noble arrives with a retinue of soldiers. He boasts of victories in far-off lands. You sense the court's mood is brittle with envy and fear. When he glances toward you, you make a gesture of mock salute that draws gasps instead of laughter. A single offhand bow with exaggerated flair becomes an insult to his honor. He marches to the Lord's side and whispers in his ear. Minutes later, you are stripped of your stipend and ordered to leave the castle before the next dawn. You pack your few belongings by candlelight and slip from the gate. You feel shame and bitterness in equal measure. The motley that once signified your place now feels like a symbol of ruin. You wander toward the forest road, wondering how to survive without a patron. You realize that the jester's life offers no safety net when favor falls away. Back in the court, you hear tales of jesters who suffered worse. One fool told a jest about the Blanc and me, Queen's labyrinthine fashions. He compared her skirts to hundreds of swans trailing through a pond. The Queen did not laugh. She summoned her own guards and accused him of lewd blasphemy against her person. He was dragged to the tower and subjected to the rack until he confessed to a crime he did not commit. His screams echoed for miles before falling silent forever. Another fool, hoping to win cheap applause, recounted a bawdy tale about an archbishop's secret desires. In the frenzy of laughter, no one thought of the church's power until the archbishop appeared before the council. He demanded the fool be handed over for heresy. The jester spent 2 years in a monastic prison, denied speech or song. When he emerged, his voice was broken and his spirit crushed. He never performed again. You learn that even tales told in private can travel far on court gossip. You hear of a wandering jester who slipped a scandal into a private joke at a garden party. The scandal cost an ambassador his post and prompted riots in a distant city. The ambassador wrote letters accusing the jester of espionage. The fool vanished without trace. Some say he fled to the king of the north. Others whisper that he ended his days in a lonely cell. You understand that your satire carries political weight. A well-placed jest can topple an advisor or force the hand of a wavering lord. Yet each victory comes with the risk of retaliation. You learn to sprinkle your jokes with kindness toward the powerful. You offer flattery first, and only then slip in your sharper edge. You earn the right to tease the Lord's foibles only after you have proven your loyalty. At times you witness justice meted out with cruel efficiency. A jester who mocked the steward's new tax law was hauled away on charges of sedition. He was flogged in the courtyard until his flesh opened. The Lord ordered his followers to watch. The man survived but lost his voice and his mind. You see his trembling body bound in chains and carry the memory of his broken laughter whenever you consider your own next jest. In moments of fear, you wonder whether the jester's life is worth the risk. You recall the day you turned a jest on the captain of the guard. You called him a brave man with the bravery of a cowering rabbit. He glared at you and whispered threats you still hear in your sleep. You wrote a humble apology in verse and placed it at his door. He read it without emotion and pocketed your quill. You never saw him again. You learned that some wounds never heal. Yet in other moments, you feel the power of the mask you wear. You see how a single well-timed jest can diffuse a quarrel before blood is spilled. You remember the night 2 nobles drew swords over a land dispute. You launched into a tale about 2 geese who would not share a pulse grain of corn. Both men laughed and lowered their blades. The tension evaporated. You sensed the gratitude in their eyes. You realize that your tongue can save lives as much as it can ruin them. You discover that survival depends on knowing when to speak and when to remain silent. You observe the faces of the court and note the slightest signs of approval or displeasure. You see the flicker of alarm in the queen's eye or the twitch of a guard's steel beneath his cloak. You weigh every word in your repertoire against the shifting currents of power. You cultivate the patience to hold back your sharpest cuts until the moment demands it. Late at night, you practice a silent vow. You promise yourself to wield humor as a healer, not a weapon of vengeance. You remind yourself that each jest can build bridges or burn them. You recall the broken laughter of those who paid too high a price for satire. You vow to honor the fool's ancient role as truth-teller, not as saboteur. You steel your heart against fear, but honor your craft with caution and with grace. Tomorrow you will step onto the stage once more. The torches will flare, and the hall will hush as you clear your throat. You will lift your scepter in salute, and let your first rhyme echo off stone walls. You will risk offense again, armed only with your wit and your motley. You will navigate the peril of mockery with the skill of a tightrope walker, and you will pray that tonight your jest draws laughter rather than tears or tragedy. After that narrow escape, you return to your loft to mend your motley coat and to whisper words of caution to yourself. You know that an apology must be swift and sincere if you are to regain favor You take a scrap of parchment and write a rhyme of humility. You thank the Chamberlain for his service and compare his guidance to the steady keel of a ship. You fold the note and place it beside his plate before the next meal, praying that your verse softens his anger. You learn that timing matters as much in apology as in jest. If you wait too long, the offense grows cold and hardens into resentment. Too soon, and your words seem hollow. You choose your moment as the court gathers for afternoon tea in the solar. You slip in beside the Chamberlain and offer your humble bow. You recite your rhyme in quiet tone, your bells silent. He reads the lines, his eyes narrowing. You hold your breath. At last he cracks a smile and nods. Once, relief washes over you. You discover that a well-fashioned apology can reopen doors you thought closed forever. Even so, you carry the memory of that misstep for weeks to come. Each time the court assembles, you feel a tug of anxiety in your gut. You imagine whispers behind your back. You see the Chamberlain's guard lingering near you as if weighing your next move. You learn that a single jest can leave scars that rumors nourish long after the apology is forgotten. Each night, you practice new lines of self-deprecation so that if another offense comes, you will have the words ready to deflect wrath. You also find allies among the courtiers who admire your courage in apologizing. The Queen's lady-in-waiting offers a kind word and tells you of her own blunders in youth. She shares a fable in which the foolish bunny outwitted the fox only by admitting error. You feel a small warmth of relief as you realize that even the highest born have stumbled. You learn that forging alliances offers protection when the walls close in around a jester. Still, there are missteps that cannot be undone. You hear of a jester in a neighboring court who mocked the king's prized hounds. He quipped that they spent more time chasing their own tails than serving the hunt. Laughter broke the tension for a moment, but the king did not speak. That night, the jester was found in the moat, his motley coat stripped away, his bells lying at the water's edge. No explanation was ever offered. The court simply moved on to the next jester. You understand that some offenses imprint themselves too deeply. When you return to the great hall, you carry the memory of that fate with you. You watch every handle and angle of the king's hounds as they walk nearby. You let your performance steer clear of hunting themes for months. You learn that to protect yourself, you must study the interests and temper of your lord as closely as your own reflections in the mirror. You also learn to craft jests that contain an escape hatch. You build a cushion of praise around your satire so that if the target bristles, they cannot deny the compliment. You call a nobleman the mightiest oak in the forest before you tease him about his short temper. You mount a hamlet of tiny wooden houses in your next performance and suggest that the steward's taxes make every cottage feel like a castle of debt. You brand each jab with a kiss of kindness, so that when the steward laughs, he understands he sits under no threat of ruin. In the days that follow your ill-timed jest, you notice that the court grows wary of overdone ridicule. You choose your targets with fresh care. You spike your routine with self-mockery and with praise of virtues small or grand. You call yourself the fool who chased his own bells when he forgot his place. The court laughs more freely at your admission of fault than at the jabs you once made at others. You discover that a jester's greatest weapon lies in the capacity to laugh at himself. Yet even self-mockery has limits. You once spun a poem about a jester who lost his wits to vanity. The audience laughed until they realized the description matched you a bit too closely. A hush fell over the hall. You froze, bells muted beneath your motley. The queen frowned and motioned you away. You spent the next week confined to the kitchens, sweeping the hearth and polishing the pots. You learned the hard lesson that revealing too much of yourself can cut deeper than any satire. On the other hand, genuine acts of service can restore a jester's position. When the queen fell ill and the physician could not coax her appetite, you crafted a gentle rhyme about the healing power of song. You sat by her bedside and hummed a lullaby you learned as a child. You painted her cheeks with a dab of rosewater. The queen smiled and called you her little nightingale. When she recovered, she summoned you to a private feast and crowned you fool of the bedchamber. You learned that kindness can redeem a jester more powerfully than any jest. Despite these victories and failures, you carry a ledger of lessons in your belt. Each line records the date, the target, the reaction, and your own next steps. You review it before every performance. You remind yourself of the jester who vanished from the moat and of the queen who crowned you in her chamber. You train your tongue to slip through these memories like a blade cutting the air. In quiet hours, you practice new apologies in verse. You fold each line into your pocket until the court demands use of your skills again. You feel the tremor of nerves at each summons to the dais, yet you also feel the steadiness that comes from having survived past near disasters. You understand that a fool's life hinges on a blend of humility and daring. Tomorrow, you will step into the great hall once more. You will lift your cap and bells and let your motley coat announce your presence. You will weigh each word as if it were gold in your hand. You will offer laughter tempered by respect and critique softened by affection. And you will carry with you the knowledge that in the perils of mockery, the jester moves between ruin and redemption with nothing but a rhyme and a bow to mark the difference. You pack your trunk at dawn, stuffing your motley coat and cap, your scepter and mask into a creaking wooden chest. The caravan waits at the gate, horses nickering for the road ahead. You swing your leg over the pack horse and grip the saddle horn, your bells tied in a small bag at your side. You know there is promise in every mile, but also peril beyond every bend. The first stretch takes you out of the stone walls of the castle and onto a dirt road rutted by cartwheels. You hold your cloak tight against the morning chill. A few miles on you pass a lonely inn with a water trough full of manure. You dismount and steady your legs before you enter. Inside the common room you find a stove and a pot of thin stew. You hollow a crust of bread and dip it in. The innkeeper nods warily at your motley. You smile and jingle a bell. He hurries to fill your bowl. Night brings mist that clings to the road and hides your path. You mount again and follow the lead horse. You do not speak. You feel a sense of unease in the straining of the reins and in the low groan of the wagon wheels. When a warning shout breaks the dawn, you spin in the saddle. Men in ragged coats step from the trees, axes raised and swords drawn. Highwaymen. You slip low in the saddle and press your feet into the stirrups. A fool without coin is easy prey, yet you cannot show fear. You raise your scepter in salute and let the bells tinkle a soft ring. The leader narrows his eyes at the bells and laughs. You toss your pouch to the ground. Coins spill out. He scoops them up and motions his men back into the woods. You exhale and grip the base reins. You learn that each tour demands both wit and willingness to pay tribute to thieves. The next day you arrive at a fair in a market town. Tents line the square like rows of lanterns, waiting for a festival of stars. You unload your trunk and hang your motley on a peg behind the stage. You practice tumbling on straw mats as villagers sample pies and mead. The local sheriff wanders through the crowd, his gaunt face peeking beneath a heavy hood. He spies the motley and smiles. He invites you to his table for a cup of wine. You bow and accept. You learn that in every new place, a jester earns favor by pleasing those who hold power. Your first performance draws a crowd of children and tradesmen. You juggle pebbles and recite a rhyme about a merchant so shrewd he squeezed a coin from his own shadow. Laughter rings across the square. Then a bell tolls and the sheriff's reeve appears at your side. He motions you away in a low voice. A local noble has arrived and demands a private show. You bow to the crowd and follow the reeve. You learn that on the road, each show can end as suddenly as it began. The noble's tent smells of wax and perfume. He seats you on a cushion of velvet and uncorks a flask of spiced wine. You perform a jig about a knight who found courage only after he misplaced his sword. The noble roars with laughter. He passes you the flask. You drink deeply. You feel the warmth spread through your limbs. You learn that success abroad can bring reward, but also the temptation to overindulge. That night, you lie by a campfire outside the town gates. You peer at the stars and feel thin at the edges. The motley coat lies folded beside you. You drift into sleep with the echoes of laughter still ringing in your ears. You dream of stage lights and jeers. Then you wake at the cry of a wolf. You grasp your scepter as you rise. Wolves circle the camp, their eyes glinting in the firelight. The guards shout and the wolf pack retreats. You learn that on the road you face dangers, both human and beast. A week later, a storm rages as you cross a river ford. Rain pounds your cloak until the motley feels more like a sodden shroud. The horses snort and rear in the current. You guide your mount to the shallowest place. Water rushes around your boots and reaches your knees. You steady yourself on the stone bed. One wrong step could send you into the icy flow. You feel the current pull at the horse's flank. You lean in and murmur a rhyme about a brave fool who turned the tide with a single step. The horse responds. You clamber to the opposite bank, drenched and shaken. You learn that bad weather can test your courage more than any mockery. Onward you travel toward a distant court. Noble banners flutter in the wind as you crest a ridge. You descend into a valley dotted with farms on the edge of a duchy. You carry a letter of introduction from a friend of the Duke. At the gates you present the scroll to the guard captain. He glances at your title, Fool of the North, and allows you entrance. You enter the courtyard and hear the clip of horses' hooves on cobbles. You learn that each heralded approach brings fresh hope, but no guarantee of safety. In the courtyard you study the layout of the castle. You note the posts where guards stand, the tents of the mercenaries camped just outside, and the balcony where the Duke addresses his people. You memorize every route to the kitchens and to the stables. You learn that each court offers its own terrain of allegiances and hazards. Inside the hall you stand before the Duke. You perform a verse about a fox who outwitted a hungry wolf. The Duke chuckles and nods. He invites you to a feast at dusk. You learn that roaming tours can extend your reputation across many lands, yet each welcome can vanish as swiftly as it came. In the days that follow you perform at markets and fairs, at banquets and taverns. You earn small purses of coin and sometimes gifts of bread and cheese. You share stories with fellow traveling players. You learn of jesters who never made it to the next stage, lost in bandit ambushes or cut down by fever. You realize that those who roam live by both skill and fortune. When you reach the next court, you find your motley coat patched and frayed. You have sewn on new pieces of cloth from mended costumes. Your cap looks more droopy at the points, but the bells still shine. You dry your boots by the hearth and polish your scepter. You stand ready to perform for another audience. You learn that the road shapes a jester's craft as much as any day of training. By the end of the season, you return to your first patron's hall. The guards greet you warily, the steward nods with relief, and the lord welcomes you back with a clap on the shoulder. You exchange coin earned abroad for a warm blanket and a bowl of hearty stew. You hang your motley in the wardrobe and sit by the fire. You reflect on the dangers you faced: highwaymen in Maya, the forest, wolves at the fire, storms in the mountain passes, and the fickle favor of foreign courts. You know that each tour has taught you new jokes and new scars. You have learned to carry laughter in your heart as a shield and a purse of coins as a promise. You have felt the thrill of new audiences and the chill of betrayal and fear. You rest now, knowing that tomorrow the road may call you again. You rise at first light, jingle a bell for luck, and prepare to pack your trunk. Once more, you wake one morning with your head pounding and a bitter taste in your mouth. Your throat feels raw, as though you swallowed a handful of gravel. You know this is no ordinary hangover. You swallow hard and test your reflection in a chipped basin. Your cheeks are pale beneath the painted rouge. Your lips quiver when you try to smile. Underneath your motley and bells, you are as fragile as a candle flame in a storm. You force yourself to dress for performance. You tug on your motley coat and fasten your cap, though every movement sends a wave of nausea through you. You clutch a thin staff as you step into the great hall. The audience hushes. You clear your throat and launch into your opening rhyme. Your words crack and falter. A cough rakes your chest. Laughter rings out at the rhyme, but falls strangely flat. You bow and slip away, your vision blurring around the torches. Behind the scenes, you collapse onto a wooden bench. A page brings you a cup of watered wine, scented with a bitter herb you cannot name. You cradle the cup as your limbs tremble. You realize that every performance could be the one that finishes you. A fever might take root. Your cough might worsen, and your body might give out beneath the motley. You learn that fragile health makes each act a desperate gamble with fate. You recall the jester who came before you in this court. He fell ill with a fever that doctors called an ague. They bled him twice in a single day, opening veins on his arm and his leg. They packed his body in warm blankets and plastered his groans with poultices of herbs. When bleeding failed, they resorted to leeches. The leeches thrived on his blood until his strength drained away. By the time he could walk again, his lungs rattled with a new cough. He left the court for good, his voice broken, and his motley left to hang on a hook. You shudder at the memory and grip your staff tight. You know the local physician earns his income from cause of death records. He visits late and in silence, carrying a chest of glass vials filled with powders of poisonous flowers. His diagnosis comes in hushed Latin, followed by a prescription for hot baths and more bleeding. You learn that medicine here can kill more swiftly than the illness itself. In the weeks that follow, you travel to a neighboring Lord's Hall. The journey brings chills and muddy roads that soak through your boots. You arrive with chills and fever already creeping. Along your spine, you brush aside the worry and perform a brief jig for the welcome banquet. Your knees wobble, your breath comes in gasps, and sweat beads beneath your painted brow. You finish the jig and collapse in the service chamber. The guards carry you to a cot in a damp corner. The castle surgeon arrives with a tray of instruments. He jabs your arm with a lancet and presses a cup to your back. You grumble as he removes the cup and exposes a welt of bruised flesh. He pronounces that you must rest for 3 days or face the risk of death. You laugh, weakly at the irony that a night's work may have cost you your life. You learn that rest is a luxury, seldom granted to a jester. In your cot, you lie surrounded by straw and the smell of musty blankets. A nurse brings a bowl of broth that tastes only of water and a single wilted carrot. You sip it in sorrow. You think of the banquet table, still laden with roast and sweets. You realize that while you performed for plenty, you receive only the scraps reserved for the sick and the poor. You learn that illness carries its own hunger, one better left unfelt on stage. By the fourth day, the fever breaks. You sit up and wrap your cloak about you. You force yourself to stand and test your legs. They shake like saplings in wind. You step back toward the great hall, knowing that any further weakness may shame you in front of the very faces you once charmed. You steady yourself on the threshold and clear your throat. The court watches. You begin your verse and find the words return. Your steps falter only once before you recover. The laughter and applause that follow feel like medicine sweeter than any herb. Still, each recovery leaves its mark. You feel the hollow ache in your chest each time you laugh. Too hard. You recall the jester who challenged a visiting monk to a contest of song. The monk responded with a chant, so solemn it quieted the hall. The jester laughed, mid-flourish, and collapsed in a coughing fit. No doctor could ease his lungs once he contracted the damp chill of the cloister. He survived only to become a silent shadow in the corridors. You learn that one misjudged rondeau can cost you breath for days. When summer arrives, you face the threat of airborne sickness in crowded fairs. You travel with a troupe of acrobats and minstrels. You perform in open fields, yet disease travels on dust, stirred by hooves and cartwheels. You share water flasks with other performers, unaware of the fevers that pass on every drop. You exchange smiles and songs, sharing nothing of your fear of contagion. You learn that fellowship can be both blessing and curse when your health is all that stands between you and collapse. At a fair in the south, you find yourself struck by a chill that no cloak can ward off. You sleep in an unheated tent, your breath fogging the canvas. You shiver through the night until dawn. You rise and perform a short comedy of shivering fools. The crowd laughs at your parody of tremors. You wonder if they see only a character, or if they glimpse the reality beneath your paint. You learn that a performance can turn your illness into entertainment, hiding real suffering behind jests. Returning to a home court, you find the kitchens have run out of fresh meat. You receive a ration of salted fish that stings your throat. You swallow a morsel and feel a return of the fever's chill. You wrap your cloak about you and gasp for warmth. The court physician arrives and prescribes a blend of sage tea and boiled nettles. The brew tastes of bitterness and ash. You sip it in hope, though you know it will not cure you. You learn that medical care here offers only rites of ritual, never remedies proven to heal. Yet you also discover the cure of laughter. When you see the court gathered for a festival of lights, you step forward with a small puppet show. You let the puppets bicker and dance until the shadows leap on the walls. The courtiers laugh and forget their hunger and their fears for a moment. You feel warmth in your bones as you watch them clap. You learn that in places of gloom, laughter can become the balm that keeps disease at bay, if only for a breath. But even laughter can lead to relapse. You find yourself coughing through your next performance. You force a grin beneath the motley paint. You finish the act, but the cough returns, so violently that you collapse into a chair. The Lord halts the feast and orders you to bed. You wonder if they think your act of weakness more foolish than your jests. You learn that in this role, your health is your currency. It buys you each stage and each song. Once spent, no applause can bring it back. Weeks later, you stand by the window of your loft and look out at the trailing banners of a departing convoy. You pack your trunk once more. You wrap your motley in cloth and tuck your bells into a pouch. You slip a vial of rose water into your pouch, hoping it might ward off sickness. On the road, you fasten your cloak and step into the dawn. You know that the journey ahead may test your health again. You realize that each mile is a gamble with disease, and yet you mount your horse with a jingle of bells and ride forward into the unknown, carrying laughter in one hand and fragile life in the other. You arrive at court on a bright morning, your bells chiming a welcome that once brought cheers but today falls strangely hollow. You find the great hall shutters drawn and the banners of your lord furled. Rumors swirl that the treasury is empty and the noble's favor has shifted to a rival family. In this sudden change of fortune, you sense the ground slipping beneath your motley boots. You step before the dais to perform your usual opening rhyme, only to find the chair of honor empty. A steward in plain brown robes meets your bow and whispers that the lord has left for the royal capital in disgrace. His lands are mortgaged and his debts too large to repay. The steward tells you to pack your trunk and be gone by nightfall. You learn that when power changes hands, a jester's role vanishes as swiftly as the last scraps of bread at a winter feast. You gather your possessions with trembling hands. Your motley coat feels heavier than ever, soaked with the fear of exile. You recall the day you first donned those bright patches, believing you served a lasting house. Now the fabric feels like shackles marking you for banishment. You sling your sack over your shoulder and step into the courtyard, eyes downcast as the guard. Captain closes the gate behind you. On the road you wander without a clear destination. Your coins are few, your debts weigh on. You lead. You remember the fine cup you took as payment for a private show and the gold purse you lost in a game of chance. You arrive in a small town where you hope to find work at. The fair. The village elder greets you with polite curiosity, but admits that the local festival budget is gone. Without your patron's name, you hold no claim to fame or favor. You learn that a jester, without a court, is little more than a vagabond. As days pass, your purse empties and worry fills your every thought. You pawn your bells for bread and your painted mask for a night's lodging beneath a loft of straw. You perform in the market square for a handful of coppers tossed by curious children. Their laughter lifts your heart for a moment, yet you feel the sting of each coin's silver edge. You realize that your craft can feed your body, but cannot fill your debts. One evening you collapse in the common room of an inn that takes pity on you. The landlord lends you a cot in the basement, in exchange for a promise to perform for the tavern crowd. You sing a ballad of a wandering fool who chases the sun and never finds his way home. The patrons applaud and tip you in ale. You take a long draught and feel your spirits lift. You think you can begin anew, but in your yesterdays you recognize the seeds of tomorrow's ruin. By dawn you hear a knock on the basement door. 2 burly men stand there, their cloaks marked with the stamp of the debtor's court. They inform you that your innkeeper fees are unpaid, and that you are bound for the debtor's prison until your debts are satisfied. You protest that you have given all your earnings to feed the poor and to keep a roof over your head. They ignore your pleas and lead you away in shackles of iron. You learn that a jester's plight can turn from whimsy to tragedy in a single unpaid debt. The debtor's prison is a foul hole beneath the city walls. Your cell is dark and damp, the air thick with the stench of despair. You lie on a plank with a ragged blanket beneath you. You count the days by the drip of water from a cracked pipe. Guards toss stale bread under the door. You discover that while a jester can charm a room full of nobles, no charm can persuade the jailer to grant clemency to a beggar unworthy of coin. In the gloom you recall each court you served, each laugh you coaxed from the noble and the commoner alike. You wonder how quickly your service was forgotten once the Lord's favor turned elsewhere. You remember the jester who mocked the king's illness only to be locked in a tower when the king recovered. His bones underscored a warning that no wit, no matter how sharp, could withstand the bitterness of a pride wounded by laughter. After a fortnight, a scrivener arrives with a parchment. It is a writ of transfer from another court where your former lord holds partial favor. The writ orders your release and safe conduct to the capital. Your heart leaps with hope as your chains clink and the jailer leads you out. Yet when you reach the street, you find no friendly face waiting. You have no court to welcome you. You carry only the memory of chains and a caution that redemption depends on more than a name, on a writ. You follow a guide to the capital gates and present the writ to the city guard. They stamp it and bid you enter. You step into a city alive with merchants and horsemen. You search for the old palace where your lord once held court. Smoke and dust obscure your view. The palace walls lie in ruin after a recent siege. You learn that your lord's fortunes fell, even in the royal capital. His debts were called in, his title stripped, and his family scattered. You realize there is no safe haven left for you beneath his name. You retreat to a tavern and perch on a broken stool. You recall your first days as a jester, when every word was welcomed as wisdom. Now each line you recite earns a sneer or a tossed coin. You smile anyway, letting the bells you managed to save jingle in time with your song. You learn that a jester's resilience matters as much as his wit. You sing of the sun's return after a storm and find a moment of grace in the faces of weary patrons. Rumors reach your ears that a wandering minstrel troupe plans to move north, performing for lords who have not heard your story. You decide to join them, offering your motley skills in exchange for passage and a share of the earnings. You pack your few belongings and place your remaining coins in your pouch. You mount a coach bound for the northern roads, bells silent beneath your cloak. You learn that exile can become opportunity when the road leads beyond ruined courts and into new realms. As the coach rattles over cobblestones, you lean against the window and stare at the passing fields. You remember the days when your jokes shaped the fate of lords and courts. Now your fate depends on your own 2 feet and on the goodwill of strangers at every inn. You hold your scepter like a traveler's staff, imagining the stage that awaits in a new land. You learn that a jester's fall from grace can be the prelude to a new beginning, if only he finds the courage to rise on his own terms. You arrive at court gates, expecting your usual welcome, yet find the treasury chest locked and the steward looking away as he counts the coins meant for your wages. You remind him of the daily stipend you are owed, yet he offers only an apology and a promise to pay you tomorrow. You learn early that a jester's income depends entirely on the shifting tides of patronage and that tomorrow often arrives with an empty purse. Your contract once guaranteed a loaf of bread each morning and a flagon of ale each evening. Any extra coin came as a bonus when your lord laughed heartily at your verse. Yet some weeks the bread arrives stale and the ale runs clear as water. You slip a copper into the steward's palm and beg for a second meager ration. He gives you a grim nod before returning to his ledgers. You learn that even a lord's promises vanish as quickly as laughter in an empty hall. When the lord hosts a feast, you expect to earn favor and perhaps a small purse of silver. Instead, you are handed a coarse wool cloak for your performance and told the treasury has been drained by the favors extended to foreign ambassadors. You bow and jingle your empty bells in mock salute. You learn that to be a jester is often to present laughter in exchange for little more than a scrap of cloth. In distant lands, you travel for tournaments and fairs where you negotiate payment on the spot. You agree to perform 3 dances and 2 ballads for 5 coppers. The innkeeper nods and reserves a cot for you in the loft. You juggle some coins in your hand and note that this sum must cover your lodging, your food, and your horse's straw. You learn that every step of the road adds expense and that the purse you start with seldom lasts beyond the first night. When you run low on funds, you visit the city's pawnbroker. You trade your painted mask and your small wooden scepter for a handful of coins. You learn that each pawned item costs you twice as much to redeem, and that the bells at your cap sit silent until you can repay the loan. You write your name in the broker's ledger and watch as they smile at your desperation. You Learn that debtors earn no applause, and that your very tools of trade can become collateral against your future. Occasionally you receive gifts of food or of cloth from the nobility. A baroness pressed a loaf of spiced bread into your hands once, and offered a bolt of green silk to patch your motley coat. You thanked her with a rhyme of gratitude, and tucked the bread into your satchel. You spread the silk across your sleeve threads to hide a tear. You learn that gifts can ease your burden for a day, yet rarely offer lasting security. Debt collectors haunt you in every town. You hear their boots on the road behind you, announcing a courier sent by a moneylender demanding payment. You hide your trunk beneath the inn's stairs and slip out into the night. You learn that a jester's life can turn from play to flight with the sound of a single knock on the door. You once borrowed a small sum from a fellow performer, promising to repay when you returned to the court that first hired you. You laid down your oath in rhyme, each verse sealed with a jingle of your bells. Yet when you finally came to settle the debt, your purse lay empty, and your patron had no coin for you. Your friend shook his head and produced writs secured by your signature. You learned that even a jester's promises carry weight, and that default can lead to debtor's prison. When you slip behind bars, you lie on sour straw alongside other debtors and beggars. The sheriff brings a crust of bread that you share with fellow inmates. Each of them tells tales of broken contracts, of forced servitude to pay off loans, and of families sold into bondage. You realize that your motley and your mockery afford you no shield once you cross the threshold of the jail. In the mornings when you are released, you face a choice. You may return to the court that cast you out, or you may try to rebuild your fortunes on the road. You learn that a jester without a patron must become mercenary, performing under any flag that offers coin. You don your motley coat once more and step onto the cobbled street, jingling your bells for the strangers who pass. Your debts follow you like dark shadows. You recall the day you lost your last 5 pennies in a pennies game of chance you never meant to play. You dared to gamble for a day free from worry. Instead, you woke to empty pouches and a summons from the moneylender's clerk. You learned that a single bet can cost you the very safety of a guaranteed ration. When you find a new patron, you kneel before their dais and perform your heartiest routine. You feel the weight of every eye on your motley and hope for a gift of purse or lodging. You bow, and 2 silver coins clink onto your scepter. You gather them with trembling fingers and tuck them into your purse. You learn to hold the coins like fragile promises, each one earned through dance or rhyme. Debt collectors continue to track you. You memorize their faces and the marks of their scribes. You move from inn to inn, trying always to stay one step ahead. You learn that a jester's agility matters not only on the stage but in the alleyways and in the courtroom. Years pass, and you accumulate fines for missed payments and for broken promises. You stand before a magistrate who demands that you surrender your motley coat in lieu of unpaid debts. The bells jingle softly as he inspects them. He nods and orders them removed. You watch as your colors are taken from you and offered for sale at the pawn shop. Your motley becomes someone else's pain and profit. Without your cap and bells, you are no longer a jester. You become a beggar, your songs falling on uninterested ears. You perform for a handful of coins tossed by children. You beg for bread at the tavern door. You learn that when debt strips you of your craft, you become as invisible as a whisper. At last you return to the court that first employed you. You kneel and lay down your worn scepter. You offer to serve in any capacity, even as a page. The steward laughs at your plight and tells you the court has need of no more foolery. He orders you to take your debts to the courthouse if you hope to settle them at all. You bow and jingle your broken bells in silent farewell. You walk away under the archway and feel the wind against your motley skirt. You have no coins, no motley, and no home. You carry only your wit and the memory of every purse you nearly held. You learn that the jester's pay is fickle, and that debt can shackle a fool more tightly than any chain. Tonight you camp by a field lit only by stars. You wrap yourself in a scrap of cloth and cradle your battered scepter like a lost child. You think of the days when you once danced for gold and feasted with lords. You vow that tomorrow you will rise and sing a new verse of hope, yet you know that in the quiet of your camp, the burden of debt weighs heavier than any coin you ever earned. You wander into a quiet village green, where an old storyteller beckons you to sit upon a fallen oak. He opens a leather-bound tome and begins to speak of the court jesters of long ago. In his passes, voice the jester becomes more than a performer in motley. He emerges as a cunning trickster who challenged kings with riddles and sly laughter. You feel the spark of wonder as the tale unfolds. You listen to the story of the Fool of Avalon, who outwitted a tyrant by turning a mirror to reflect his own greed. In the legend, you see a reflection of those jesters who used humor as a shield and a sword. The trickster's jests slip past palace guards and reveal the heart of power. You learn that in folklore, the jester lives on as a symbol of cunning over force. Later, you meet a group of children at a midsummer festival who wear paper crowns of leaves and painted mock beards. They mime the antics of Fool Baldric, who once saved a city from siege by feigning madness before the enemy general. You watch them stumble in motley robes stitched from leftover cloth. Their laughter rises like birds at dawn. You understand that the legacy of the jester passes from generation to generation through play and through the art of subversion. In a dusty library, you find a 17th century ballad that casts the jester as a guide through the corridors of truth. The poem describes how he leads the blind king by a rope of rhyme until the monarch glimpses his own folly. You study the manuscript's faded ink and imagine the author hissing words in candlelight to avoid the watch of censors. You learn that literature preserved the jester's voice when courts silenced actual fools. You turn the pages and discover a collection of fables in which the jester speaks to animals as equals. In one tale, he converses with a magistrate crow perched atop a dais. The crow speaks of the weight of judgment. The jester replies in verse that justice belongs to the humble. You smile at the image of a bird in robes and a fool with bells teaching the laws of mercy. You sense that in folklore, the jester inhabits a world where voices small and meek carry the greatest wisdom. On the road, you meet a wandering minstrel who carries a carved wooden puppet of a jester. She demonstrates a short play in which the fool of the forest corrects the council of owls that hoot only ancient proverbs and never answer new questions. You clap at her deft manipulation of the puppet's limbs. You marvel how the jester's image adapts to every culture and every tongue. You learn that the symbol of the jester thrives wherever people yearn for a voice to speak truth to power. At a university, you attend a lecture on courtly satire in medieval drama. The professor traces the character of the fool in many plays, who comments on the tragic hero's flaws. He shows how the fool's brief songs break the tension and reveal hidden fears. You take notes as he quotes lines that ring as true today as they did 500 years ago. You learn that the jester shaped the foundation of drama by showing that laughter and insight walk hand in hand. In a small museum, you gaze upon a woodcut of a jester holding a skull in one hand and a scepter in the other. The caption reads, "That fool held death in his palm." You study the image and feel a chill. The jester's painted face stares back at you with empty eyes. You wonder if he invites you to laugh or to tremble. You realize that in folklore, the jester also became a harbinger of doom, reminding kings that all riches fade before time's scythe. One late evening, you join a circle of poets around a fire beneath castle ruins. They recite verses about the last court fool who crossed a queen with a broom instead of a blade. The queen forgave him only because his mockery revealed her own vanity. You listen as the poets debate whether a fool's license ever truly ends. You sense that the jester's legacy lives in the tension between mercy and mockery. You carry a leather-bound journal where you copy your favorite tales. Each line becomes a charm you whisper before your next performance. You note how each culture uses the jester differently. In some he wears bells, and in others a cap of feathers. Yet in every story he stands at the margins of power, free to speak what others fear. You learn that the jester's image transforms, but his purpose remains constant: to shine a light on folly. During a winter solstice celebration, you see children weaving garlands of holly and mistletoe around a wooden puppet of a jester. They dance and shout his name, calling for laughter to break the long night. You join their circle and dance with them, your bells and your motley echoing in the crisp air. You feel the power of that ritual. You learn that the jester became a spirit of renewal, a keeper of laughter when days grew short and cold. In a final encounter, you visit an ancient oak that legends say was once the stage of a traveling jester who vowed his soul to the tree. Local villagers leave ribbons at its roots, each knot a wish for laughter to return to forgotten places. You tie a ribbon of red silk from your motley to the bared branch. You whisper a promise to keep the jester's spirit alive. You learn that even as courts crumble and coins vanish, the jester's legacy endures in hearts that cherish laughter as a weapon against despair. You began this life chasing laughter and applause. You mastered balance and rhyme. You learned to probe the follies of kings with a wink and a jingle of bells. Yet every skill you gained carried equal risk. Each performance was a test of wit and nerve. Each court you served could turn on you in a heartbeat. In the end, the motley life demands more than talent. It asks for courage born of desperation, or daring born of recklessness. From your first trial before the Lord's steward, you understood that your safety depended on the favor of those you mocked and amused. You danced and tumbled to earn your place, but your rival courtiers watched your every move. A single misstep could undo weeks of praise. Your motley coat was a banner of your belonging and a signal of your vulnerability. You carried no sword, no shield, only the sharp edge of your words. You faced hazards from the start. Agrarian roads turned to quagmires in the rain. Highwaymen lurked at every bend. You learned to carry tribute in advance and to let your jokes soothe the men with blades. You crossed rivers where horses stumbled, and you felt the currents chill in your boots. You endured storms that soaked your cloak and chilled your bones. Every tour was a gamble with weather and with thieves. At fairs, you performed under open sky and on crowded church steps. You risked outbreaks of pestilence in the dust of market towns. You drank from buckets that tasted of rot, and you shared flasks with companions who carried fevers in their breath. You learned to cloak your fear in laughter. Each cough might signal a return of the plague, or of a simple chill that no doctor could cure. You carried fragile life beneath your paint. Courts offered no refuge. You traded praise for coin and crumbs. Your daily stipend of bread and watered ale paid your rent above the hall, but left you hungry. You pawned your bells and your mask to pay debts. Each new loan cost twice as much to redeem, and every promise you made bound you closer to debtor's prison. You watched fellow jesters vanish behind iron bars for unpaid rent or unseen fines. You learned that loyalty to a lord meant nothing when his purse ran dry. When disease struck, you found doctors eager to bleed you and to cauterize your skin with hot irons. You emerged weaker than before. You faced fevers that robbed your voice and chills that bent your frame. Your only remedy was to rest, though rest cost you your place on the stage. You returned to perform half-healed, while laughter echoed hollow in your head. You knew that each illness could be your last. In every court intrigue, you navigated shifting alliances with jokes that cut truths and flattery that soothed tempers. You wielded humor as both shield and sword. You diffused quarrels between nobles and laid bare hypocrisy in a single quip, yet each victory came at the price of 1,000 calculations. You mastered timing only to learn that a ruler's temper could turn on a joke at your expense. You saw colleagues dragged off in chains for transgressions you dared only whisper. When your patron fell from grace, you found your world collapsing. You had staked your survival on his favor. In his disgrace, your motley became a burden. You were cast out of the gate with empty hands and an echo of bells that no one heeded. You traveled from court to court hoping for welcome, yet met only closed doors. You realized that a jester's identity rests entirely on the patron he serves. Lose that anchor, and you drift among strangers. Debt collectors trailed you like hounds. You pawned your scepter and your cloak. You borrowed from fellow performers, and you struggled to repay when coin came in. You learned that jesters share the poverty of vagabonds. Your wages were never fixed. You lived by barter and by the generosity of innkeepers who saw entertainment as profit. You owed debts that outlived your laughter. When you tried to repay your debts in performances, you found crowds less eager to laugh. They paid for beer and for roast pork, yet refused to spare a copper for your debts. You learned that debt transforms the welcome you once received into suspicion. A jester who owes coin becomes a beggar, worthy of no pity. Your final downfall came in a court where you thought yourself safe. You had served the new lord for many years. You had earned small estates and a pension large enough to repay all debts, yet a single ill-timed jest, undone by a nervous slip, cost you your pension and your lands. You watched in silence as your motley was stripped from your shoulders and your bells taken from your cap. The Lord announced that a fool's license has limits and that you had breached them. You bowed and accepted the disgrace without protest. You left behind your home and your title, a jester no longer. You carried only your battered scepter and the memory of laughter that once filled the hall. You wandered into towns that knew your name only in old ballads. You stood outside taverns and begged for a coin. Children pointed at you as a relic of folly. You realized that the motley life leaves nothing but legend when a jester's fate is sealed. Yet in the twilight of your days, you reflect on the mind of a jester. You recall the exhilaration of speaking truth to power in rhyme. You remember the freedom of mocking vice while hiding beneath a painted grin. You recall the bonds you forged with nobles and peasants alike. You recall the nights when laughter brought unity to a fractured court. You understand that humor was more than entertainment. It was a calling that only the desperate or the daring could bear. You see now why few embrace this life. It offers no certainty, only the chance to turn folly into wisdom for a fleeting moment. It demands courage to perform under watchful eyes and heart, to deliver jests that provoke thought and ease sorrow. It carries hazards of poverty, illness, exile, and even death. Yet it also affords a rare kind of power. A jester holds the mirror to folly and the key to joy. He speaks truths that lords cannot utter and calms storms with a single rhyme. In the end, the jester's downfall is also his triumph. When his motley falls to rags and his bells are silenced, he lives on in stories and in the laughter of those who dare to question authority. His legacy outlives the courts that cast him out, in every trickster's tale and in every poem that honors the wise fool you hear, the echo of a bell, faint but unbroken. You close your eyes and imagine that sound calling you back, a reminder that the spirit of the jester endures wherever truth needs a voice and laughter breaks the chains of fear.